My sister, Stacy, returned home with a miracle baby, crashed my wedding, and tried to ruin my life. Now, she's facing jail time for her lies. Let me take you back to where it all started. I'm 24, and I got married just a week ago. What was supposed to be the happiest day of my life turned into chaos, but let me explain why. Stacy is my older sister, 26. We've never had an easy relationship, and rivalry has been at the core of our bond from day one. Growing up, we were like oil and water, nothing ever meshed. We were constantly in competition, always trying to one-up each other. It wasn't just sibling squabbles, it was a fierce battle for attention, validation, and superiority. Even as we grew older, that animosity never faded. Sure, we pretended to like each other in front of our parents, but deep down, we couldn't stand each other. We didn't even talk much unless we had to. Our interactions felt like a performance, one we both had mastered. Our parents knew it too. They never forced us to fix things, they knew we just didn't get along. I remember the relief I felt when Stacy moved out at 18 for college. It was like I could finally breathe. No more walking on eggshells, no more pretending. For the first time, the house felt like it was mine, my space, my rules. Stacy would come back for the holidays, and the moment she stepped through the door, she would start boasting about how amazing her life was. She was at one of the top business schools in the state, and I couldn't help but feel a bit jealous. But I didn't show it. Instead, I threw myself into my own work, determined to prove I could do better. And then, I did. I got into an Ivy League school, a huge slap in the face to Stacy. It felt like I had finally won. The competition had always been fierce between us, and getting into an Ivy League school was like the ultimate victory. The celebrations came pouring in, but Stacy? She didn't say much. It was almost like she had expected me to get in. I thought that with this accomplishment, our rivalry would finally be over. But, of course, that wasn't the case. Out of nowhere, Stacy announced she was starting her own business. And, with a little help from Dad, she made it happen. I still don't know if it was luck or sheer hard work, but the business took off. She moved to Japan to expand the tech side of it, and her success was undeniable. Our parents were beyond proud of her. Meanwhile, I was stuck in a rut. When I graduated, life didn't exactly fall into place for me. Stacy's success only made things worse. Her business was thriving, while I struggled to even find a job. I managed to get something, but it was a dead-end gig that I hated. So, I quit. And it was a mistake, a huge mistake. I thought something better would come along, but nothing did. For a while, I was waiting for the universe to hand me something better, but it never did. Slowly, depression crept in. The comparison to Stacy's perfect life hurt more than I cared to admit. And while I pretended to be happy for her, deep down, I was bitter. I couldn't help it. My parents, of course, would talk about Stacy's accomplishments nonstop, and I had to smile and nod, all while hiding my true feelings. Then came Jackson. Meeting him was the best thing that happened to me in a long while. I had been struggling for months, trying to find a purpose, and he came along when I least expected it. It had been months since I quit my job, and I was barely scraping by, depending on my parents for money. Every time they sent me money, I could hear the disappointment in their voices, and it killed me. It was so hard to face the reality that Stacy was soaring while I was sinking. But Jackson, he changed everything. I wasn't looking for anything serious when I downloaded a dating app. I just needed a distraction. A way to escape my failures, my frustrations. I went on a few dates, nothing special, just some casual encounters that never went anywhere. But then, I matched with Jackson. He was different. He wasn't interested in casual flings. He wanted something real. And that honesty? It was exactly what I needed. He was upfront, charming, and funny. He didn't try to impress me with flashy words, he just was. His life had been different from mine. He had been a straight-A student, then went to culinary school and worked in a restaurant. He wasn't trying to compete with anyone. And that's what I liked about him. We went on our first date, and it felt like magic. I didn't have to pretend to be someone I wasn't. For once, I wasn't trying to prove anything. It was easy, relaxed, and real. It was the best date of my life. Everything just clicked. There was no pressure, no comparisons, no competition, just two people enjoying each other's company. It was exactly what I needed. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I had to live up to anyone else's expectations, especially not Stacy's. I made the decision to give our relationship a real shot. We went on a few more dates, and things felt like they were falling into place. But then, just 3 months in, I found out I was pregnant. At that moment, the only thing running through my mind was how Jackson would react. Nothing else seemed as important because, by that point, he knew everything there was to know about me. Within the first few weeks of us being together, I'd shared my entire life with him, the good, the bad, the complicated. I told him about the years of competition with my sister, the constant struggle to outdo her. But being with Jackson, something inside me shifted. I felt a yearning to be a better person, someone more confident in my own skin. Jackson knew me, and I felt like I knew him, too. In fact, it was him who had pushed me to snap out of my slump and start actively looking for a job, rather than just waiting for an opportunity to fall into my lap. I took back my old job at the company I'd quit, and looking back, I realized it was one of the best decisions I'd made. When the pregnancy news hit, I felt strangely at ease. I had been working for almost a month, and things with Jackson were still going great. The only lingering question was how he would handle it. Would he be scared? Would he back out? After all, most people would see this as too soon, too complicated. But deep down, I felt like I was ready to become a mother. It wasn't something I could explain fully, it was just this deep knowing that it was the right step. When I told Jackson, his reaction completely surprised me. He was incredibly supportive. He said that my body, my choice, and that no matter what I decided, he would stand by me. But when I told him I wanted to keep the baby, I saw the joy in his eyes. He was thrilled. He admitted that he had hoped I would choose to keep the baby because, even though we had only been together for a few months, he felt ready, too. Despite his youth, despite everything being so new, he was ready for this. He said he didn't want to come off as overbearing, which is why he had left the decision up to me. But my choice, my decision, made him the happiest man alive. We both agreed that while we were having this baby, we wanted to take our time getting to know each other even more before rushing into marriage. That was the plan. And so, we moved forward with the pregnancy. A few weeks later, we got another surprise, twins. I couldn't believe it at first, but we both laughed and embraced it. Life was happening fast, but we were in it together. Shortly after, Jackson moved in with me, and we introduced each other to our families. His parents were warm and welcoming. They didn't try to force any rivalry among their kids, just love and support. It was the kind of family dynamic I'd never experienced. Growing up, my own family hadn't been like that. They were loving, but they didn't encourage harmony, they encouraged competition. That's why I dreaded the idea of introducing Jackson to my parents. I knew how they would react. I was a promising student, someone with a bright future. But here I was, pregnant with a man I barely knew, moving in with him. Any parent would disapprove. I braced myself for their disappointment, their anger. But as my stomach began to show, I knew the time had come. I could no longer hide it. So, I called them over for a meeting when I was 4 months pregnant. I asked Jackson to be there for support. They already knew about Jackson, of course, but they didn't know about me living with him or that I was carrying his children. I fully expected a storm of anger and disappointment when I told them. But their reaction? It was nothing like I imagined. Instead of anger, they were excited, thrilled. They hugged me, congratulating me on the pregnancy. And when I told them about the twins, my mother almost fainted from joy. It was an unexpected reaction, but it felt like a weight had lifted off my shoulders. To my surprise, my parents threw me a party, announcing to everyone that they were going to be grandparents. They told everyone, and it felt like a celebration of life rather than a reprimand. I also shared with them that Jackson and I didn't want to rush into marriage just because of the pregnancy. We wanted to take our time and really get to know each other before making such a huge commitment. And they were fine with that. They were incredibly supportive. I couldn't believe it. I had feared they would turn against me or try to make me change my mind, but they didn't. I even told them how surprised I was by their support, and their response was deeply emotional. They confessed that they had never truly been the best parents when it came to fostering a healthy sibling relationship. They had always pushed me and my sister to compete, thinking it was a good thing. They thought they were helping us by constantly challenging us to do better. But looking back, they realized that their approach might have hurt us more than it helped. This realization came when they found out I had quit my job to do something better, inspired by my sister's success. It was a bit surreal to hear them acknowledge this, especially since I had never voiced it aloud to them. But they knew. They understood the impact their actions had on me, and they apologized. They told me they didn't want me to compete anymore, that I didn't need to prove myself to them or anyone else. They were proud of me for who I was, and they loved me, just as they loved my sister. It was a conversation I'd needed for a long time, and I was grateful we'd finally had it. I had asked my parents to help with the kids while Jackson and I were working. They had, of course, done the same with Stacy, but the conversation hadn't gone as smoothly as they'd hoped. Stacy had laughed it off, dismissing their concerns with a wave of her hand. "I don't need them telling me that," she had said, genuinely believing I was just a sore loser, having a breakdown over nothing. My parents tried to ease the situation, telling us both they were proud of each of us equally. But Stacy, stubborn as ever, refused to accept that they were trying to be better, that they were attempting to turn over a new leaf. In her mind, she was the one deserving of all their love. After all, by her standards, she was the one who had it all together, doing better in life. It didn't sit right with me. She had this belief that she was more worthy simply because she thought she was winning. After all, success to her was measured in wealth, and I wasn't exactly keeping up. My parents, who had always tried to maintain peace, said they'd talk to her again when she came home for the holidays. Online interactions weren't the same, they reasoned, and she just needed to hear it face to face. They promised me they'd have the same conversation with Stacy, hoping to stop her from trying to make everything a competition. It wasn't just a one-time thing. Ever since I'd announced my pregnancy, she'd been making backhanded comments. Little jabs here and there, comments in the family group chat, just to put me down and make me feel bad. It was her way of reminding me that, by her judgment, I was failing, pregnant before marriage, living with a guy I hardly knew. In her eyes, I had failed, and it seemed like she was reveling in it. I never thought I should feel ashamed about being pregnant. But to her, it was a colossal failure. And she made sure everyone knew it. It wasn't easy to bear, especially since she seemed to make it a point to belittle me, and I had seriously considered leaving the group chat. But my parents convinced me to stay, for their sake. They wanted us to stick together, they said, and I wasn't about to make them feel like I was giving up on that. They promised they'd handle it. If they couldn't put an end to Stacy's cruelty, I was free to leave. They had my back. When Stacy finally came home for Christmas, my parents did talk to her. But by then, she was too far gone. Her entire existence seemed to revolve around making me feel small. The year before had been bad enough with her constant bragging about her business success, but this year? It was unbearable. She had returned from Japan with a new edge, and now, knowing I was pregnant and nowhere near her level of success, she didn't hesitate to remind everyone of it. It was as though she was basking in her victories, constantly throwing her success in my face. She'd look at me with that smug smile, even asking if I wasn't proud of her. I couldn't bear it, so I left the party early, trying my best to avoid losing my temper or breaking down in front of everyone. After that night, my parents tried again, but Stacy just wouldn't relent. She was unapologetic, saying she'd worked hard for everything and wasn't going to hide it. She was going to brag, and if I couldn't handle it, that was my problem. That was the moment I knew cutting ties was the only option. I left the group chat. My parents agreed it was for the best. We didn't speak for years. I had no idea what she'd been up to, but then, about a month ago, I heard a shocking update. Stacy was back from Japan with a baby. A 2-month-old, no less. I couldn't believe it at first. My parents had been video calling her before her return, and there was no sign of her pregnancy. She said she'd kept it a secret, wanted it to be a surprise for everyone. Turns out, she'd recently gotten married in a private ceremony to the father of her child. I was floored. It was all so sudden, especially since it happened right around the time I was supposed to get married. The timing felt deliberate. Everyone in the family was talking about Stacy's marriage and her miracle baby, and it seemed like the attention had completely shifted away from me. It felt like she had stolen my moment, and now, all anyone wanted to talk about was her and her daughter. She said her husband was still in Japan because of work, but she had come here with the baby to introduce her to the family. I couldn't let that get to me, though. I was getting married soon, and that was supposed to be the focus. So, I continued to distance myself, hoping I could get through my wedding without more drama. But as usual, Stacy found a way to ruin it. She showed up at my wedding, uninvited, of course, just after the ceremony. When I saw her among the guests, my blood started to boil. But Jackson and my parents helped calm me down. She'd snuck in, and if I made a scene, it would only make the whole day about her. So, I held it together. The wedding venue wasn't exactly the most secure place, and in hindsight, I regret not having better security. If we had, maybe we could have avoided all of this. But there she was, going from person to person, bragging about her miracle baby. She even had the nerve to tell everyone that my children didn't count because they were born out of wedlock. It was so insulting. She had no shame. Everyone came up to me later, telling me what she'd said, and I had to keep smiling through it all. I didn't want to ruin my day by fighting with her. I was determined to make it through, even if it was excruciating. But just when I thought I'd get through the day without losing my temper, things took an unexpected turn. The police arrived, out of nowhere. They locked down the exits. Everyone was stunned. I had no idea what was going on until I heard the news. Stacy was arrested, and it felt like a small shred of peace was finally restored. It was all so disorienting. I could hear a woman crying, her screams cutting through the chaos, and there she was, holding a baby she claimed was mine, but it wasn't. It was supposed to be Stacy's baby, but something was off. The blur of statements, the clinking sound of handcuffs, it all melded together into a nightmare that didn't make sense. It wasn't until much later that we pieced things together. The baby wasn't Stacy's at all. All the pictures she had shown us? They weren't hers. They were stolen from a friend's social media. She had somehow photoshopped herself into the images like some kind of sick impersonator. But it didn't stop there. Every time Stacy had showed up with that baby, she wasn't even the real mother. She had been babysitting for a friend, pretending to be the mother, and had been living with that friend since returning from Japan. She had cut ties with her own apartment and was looking for a new place, so she had been doing this babysitting gig for free. It was bizarre. The whole time, she had kept this secret, never letting our family or any of our relatives visit her. The only time she invited us was on the day of my wedding. She took it way too far. Without her friend's consent, Stacy snuck out with the baby. Her friend and her husband were asleep when she took the child, and when they tried calling her, she refused to answer. That's when her friends, desperate and worried, called the police to have her arrested. The only reason they knew where to find her was because Stacy couldn't stop talking about my wedding. She was obsessed. She kept mentioning how badly she wanted to ruin it. So, her friends figured out her plan and managed to track her down. It was insane. I couldn't believe it was happening. What's worse is that Stacy always had this competitive edge, but to go to such insane lengths to try and one-up us in front of our parents? It was psychotic. She wanted to prove to everyone that she was better than us, at any cost. Now, she's begging her friends not to press charges. She knows she's not going to win this battle and that jail is her only possible future if she's convicted. But still, somehow, she's blaming me for it all. She claims that I got married just to rub it in her face. Let me remind you, I haven't spoken to Stacy in nearly 2 years. Not since our last interaction, which was messy. Yet, I still made the decision to let her attend my wedding. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to embarrass her. She was the one who turned my wedding into a nightmare. If anyone should be angry here, it's me. And then yesterday, she reached out to me. She said I had somehow convinced her friends to take the extreme steps they did. She wanted me to talk to them, to convince them she wasn't in her right mind, so they wouldn't press charges. She wanted me to help her out of this mess. I couldn't believe it. I told her, straight up, that I wished she'd end up in prison. Honestly, I think that's where she belongs, or at least a psych ward, because she's completely unhinged. But my parents, are telling me I need to help her. They think I should convince her friends that she wasn't thinking straight when she pulled this stunt. They want me to do this, not for Stacy, but for the sake of the family. They think that if I don't help her, I'll be in the wrong. But deep down, I know she doesn't deserve my help. The whole thing is a tangled mess. Stacy had been living with her friend and babysitting the baby, so technically, it wasn't a straightforward kidnapping case. The police can't really do much without her friend's consent, and Stacy's claiming that they did, in fact, agree to her taking the child. But who knows if that's true? It's still up in the air. They need to decide whether to press charges. I'm not sure what's worse, having to make that decision or being caught in the middle of it all. Now, my family expects me to help her, and it feels like they're pressuring me. I'm just not sure I can do it. I feel like Stacy dug her own grave, and now she needs to figure out how to get herself out of it. The truth is, I'm considering cutting ties with my entire family, including my parents. They helped me a lot during my pregnancy, but right now, I need space. I just want to be with my husband and kids. I can't keep getting pulled into this drama. I'm tired. Tired of the lies, the manipulation, and the stress. Stacy doesn't deserve my help. She's crazy, and she's made this mess herself. Jackson agrees with me. He supports my decision, and he knows it's time for me to step back. Update: a few relatives reached out to tell me that Stacy's in deeper trouble than we thought. Her friends are going to press charges, and this could go even further. Stacy's story is unraveling. She claimed that her friends gave her permission to take the baby whenever she wanted, but it's going to be hard to prove that in court. With all the lies she's told and how she acted during my wedding, there's no way she can talk her way out of this one. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it's not a surprise. I'm not speaking to my parents right now, and I don't plan to until they realize how badly they've handled this situation with Stacy. They need to understand that this is partially their fault. They need to own up to the role they played in all of this. Update 2, so Stacy is now facing trial. We don't know how this will end, but it's looking like she might face jail time. 5 years, maybe more, if she's convicted. But honestly, who knows? She's mentally unstable, and that could change everything. But that's not my problem anymore. Jackson and I are still planning our honeymoon. After all the drama with the wedding, we need this time for ourselves. We can't ask my parents to watch the kids, though, since we're not talking to them. Jackson's parents are stepping up to help us, so it's just a 2-week break. I'm hoping it will be better than the wedding because honestly, it can't get worse. It's just going to be me and Jackson, and that's all I need right now.